Do you know what the absolute worst part of betrayal is? It is not the exact moment you find out. It is the moment when they actually believe. You will never find out. Tonight, my husband's mistress was standing in a parking garage, dangling the keys to a luxury car in my face like a shiny, triumphant trophy. I didn't cry. I simply smiled. Because tucked away inside my pocket, I held the one single thing that destroys a man faster than any insult or screaming match ever could. Absolute, undeniable proof. They are out there celebrating right now. But I am about to completely wipe the board clean. My name is Beatrice Sterling. And over the past 15 years, I have built an absolute empire upon the bedrock of the New York City commercial real estate market. I am 41 years old, the sole founder of Sterling Capital and Hospitality, and I know the precise difference between the scent of a closing deal and the stench of sheer desperation. Tonight, however, the aroma drifting through my Central Park South penthouse was strictly that of roasted Arabica coffee beans and something that smelled faintly of a lie. The digital clock on the stainless steel Sub-Zero refrigerator glowed brightly. It was 1:45 inches the morning. My husband, Derek Foster, was finally home. He walked into the kitchen, loosening his silk tie with a dramatic, heavy sigh that was clearly designed to solicit my sympathy. I sat at the massive marble island, my hands wrapped around a ceramic mug that had gone completely cold an hour ago. Derek was the CEO of Sterling Urban Developments, a subsidiary company that I had created quite specifically for him. I did it because I loved him. And because a man like Derek, who grew up fighting for scraps in a decaying industrial town in the Rust Belt, desperately needed a stage to perform on. I gave him the spotlight, the script, and the audience. I just never thought he would start improvising his own lines. "You're still awake," Derek said, his voice appropriately scratchy with feigned exhaustion. He walked past me, leaning down to press a superficial, thoughtless kiss to my forehead. He smelled of expensive scotch and that stale, recycled air you only find in the lobby of a luxury hotel. "I was just reviewing the quarterly projections for the new boutique hotel chain," I lied smoothly. In reality, I had been staring out at the iconic city skyline, watching the lights of Midtown Manhattan, and wondering why on earth my husband's phone had been going straight to voicemail since 6 p.m. Derek poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the opposite counter, facing me. He pulled his smartphone out of his pocket and immediately placed it face down on the marble surface. That tiny, instinctual little movement hit me harder than a physical slap across the face. It was the universal, undeniable gesture of a man harboring a secret. "Rough night?" I asked, making sure to keep my voice soft and inviting. This was the little dance we did. Outside of these penthouse walls, I was the apex predator, the shark who ate fierce competitors for lunch. Inside these walls, I took off my armor. I played the role of the supportive, loving wife simply because I wanted our home to be the one place on earth where we didn't have to compete. Exhausting. He exhaled heavily, running a hand through his carefully styled hair. Those Silicon Valley investors are absolutely brutal. They want to squeeze every last red cent out of the Hudson River waterfront project before they even think about signing. I've been talking until my jaw physically aches. I nodded slowly, taking a sip of my freezing cold coffee just to have something to do with my hands. The waterfront expansion. I thought that was already deep in the zoning and permits phase. Derek stiffened slightly. It was microscopic, a tiny, fleeting tension in his shoulders that only a deeply observant wife or a nocturnal predator would ever notice. "It is," he said entirely too quickly. "But you know how these tech money guys are. They need to be coddled. They need to feel like absolute kings before they'll agree to release the capital." He paused, looking at me with those boyish, pleading eyes that had thoroughly charmed me a decade ago. "Actually, that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. I need an authorization for a wire transfer, just to grease the wheels." I set my ceramic mug aside. "How much?" "Sem by Boscher. Ling ling ling. Let's tam. 1. The Sint. 84. And grade. Reason. Dacer. Tension. I'm If. To. Calmer. And resses? There. Readable. Angry. They. Andividi. I have never. 80. Edredians. I'm down. Am. Averday. 1. Wes. Toynbreed. I was calm. If you. Anacastavan. Axum. Talvarus. Where. And her. Reese's noted. 1. I have no ret. In Isles. Axis. 1. Arbem. Out of this man's. Every bores. Taxes. Craze. And is stayed. Frode. Incristed. I'm. Crated. Our load. Tens to stayed. Raid. 2. I'm sit. Tanses. Don't for maze. Hever. Right. Readed. I am. Hide. There says. 1. I fold. 1. 2. 1 day. Oat. It stirred a bed. 9. 1. I weigh. Ov. It sighed rude vers. The very round. Coming tenanted. Oh. Clace. I go. 380,000. He said. Head drop Thenumber incredibly casually, a sif who were asking me for 20, buck stodip a pizza delivery guy. 380,000. That is a highly significant amount of money for simple entertainment costs, Derek. I said, ensuring my tone remained perfectly neutral. It's not just dinner. B, he said, his voice immediately taking on a defensive, sharp edge. It's closing costs. It's booking the private penthouse suites for their entire team, the security deposits for the venue, the high-end corporate gifts. We are talking about a $100 million project here. You have to spend money to make money. You were the one who taught me that. I looked at him. I really, truly looked at him. He was wearing the custom-tailored suit that I bought for him, wearing the luxury watch I gifted him on our 5th wedding anniversary, standing inside the multi-million-dollar kitchen that I paid for. He was right. I did teach him that. But I also taught him the value of due diligence. And what he was saying right now did not align with the reality of the business empire I had built from the ground up. I knew the Hudson River project inside and out. I knew that the zoning permits were currently stalled at the City Planning Commission because of a mandatory environmental impact study. There was absolutely no closing happening this week. There were no Silicon Valley investors flying in because I had personally reviewed the investor relations log just 2 days ago. But I didn't say any of that. All right, I said. Derek blinked, visibly taken aback by how easily I capitulated. All right. If you say it is absolutely necessary for the deal to go through, I trust you, I said, forcing a tight, convincing smile onto my face. I will authorize the wire transfer to your operational account first thing in the morning. A massive wave of relief washed over him, followed almost instantly by a fleeting flash of arrogance that he desperately tried to conceal. He walked over and wrapped his arms around me, burying his face in the crook of my neck. Thank you, baby. You are the best. I promise you, this deal is going to be the big one. I'm going to make you so proud. He pulled away, grabbed his phone, still being incredibly careful not to let the screen face my direction, and headed straight toward the master bedroom. I'm going to pass out. Don't stay up too late. I waited until I heard the heavy click of the bedroom door shutting securely. Then, the profound silence of the penthouse descended upon me, heavy and suffocating. I picked up my tablet and unlocked it. I did not navigate to the banking transfer screen. Instead, I pulled up the expense reports from his subsidiary company for the last 3 entire months. I had ignored the subtle red flags before, easily dismissing them as mere paranoia or simply the accepted cost of doing high-level business. But now, staring at the glowing screen in the darkened kitchen, the raw data formed a pattern that I could no longer deny or ignore. There were massive charges from restaurants that I knew for a fact Derek absolutely hated fusion cuisine spots with tasting menus that took 4 agonizing hours to get through. There were repeated stays at a trendy boutique hotel down in Soho, booked under the flimsy justification of consultant accommodations. There were exorbitant purchases at high-end jewelers that Sterling Capital had absolutely no corporate partnerships with. And now, $380,000. He had asked for a perfectly round number. People who are lying about money almost always use round numbers. Real corporate business expenses are $382,415. They are precise. Desperation creates round numbers because they sound substantial and clean to the ear. I looked down at my cold coffee. A thin, unpleasant film had formed on the surface. For years, I had convinced myself that my immense success was a protective shield that guarded our marriage. I thought that if I gave him enough power, enough money, enough unbridled freedom, he would never feel the emasculating need to look elsewhere. I thought we were true partners, but looking at the requested transfer amount echoing in my head, I realized that I wasn't his partner. I was a resource. I was his personal bank. I stood up and walked slowly to the sink, pouring the dark, freezing liquid straight down the drain. I watched the swirl vanish into the dark pipes. The Beatrice, who blindly signed massive checks just because she wanted to play the role of the good wife, was officially dead and gone. She had just been poured down the drain right along with the stale coffee. I rinsed the mug and placed it into the dishwasher. My movements were entirely calm, almost mechanical. I felt absolutely no desire to cry. Instead, I felt a strange, icy clarity settling deep into my chest. If Derek wanted to play the role of the big-shot CEO making massive, high-roller power plays, I would let him. I would give him the exact amount of rope he asked for. I would transfer the $380,000. But I wouldn't just hand it over blindly. I was going to follow every single digital footprint of that money. I turned off the kitchen lights, plunging the massive room into complete darkness. As I walked down the hall toward the master bedroom, where my husband was currently sleeping peacefully alongside his secrets, I made a silent, unbreakable vow. He thought he was closing a massive real estate deal. He had absolutely no idea that he was actually opening a federal-level investigation. The peace inside this house was already shattered beyond repair. Now, it was solely a matter of figuring out exactly how much the impending wreckage was going to cost him. The morning sun hit the granite countertops of my kitchen with a bright glare that felt almost offensive. I stood perfectly still by the espresso machine, listening to the grinder pulverize the beans, a violent, aggressive sound that perfectly matched the high frequency of my racing thoughts. I had officially authorized the $380,000 wire transfer at 7 a.m. sharp. By 7:15 a.m., I was already on the phone with the only man in New York City whom I trusted more than my own legal counsel. Harrison Price had been my chief financial officer since Sterling Capital was nothing more than an LLC registration and a cheap laptop sitting on a dining room table. He was a man of incredibly few words and absolute, unrelenting precision. "Beatrice," he answered on the very first ring. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He knew I never called his personal secured line this early unless the corporate building was actively on fire. "I just approved a wire transfer to the Urban Development's operational account," I said, keeping my voice hushed even though I was completely alone in the kitchen. $380,000. The internal memo states it is for vendor security deposits on the Hudson River project. "I'm looking at it right now," Harrison said. I could hear the rapid, rhythmic clicking of his mechanical keyboard in the background. "Do you want me to block it?" "No," I said firmly. "Let it go through. But I need you to track every single cent of that money. I want to know exactly where it ends up. You want the receiving bank?" "No, I want the ultimate beneficiary. If it moves through a shell company, I want to know exactly who owns the shell." The keyboard clicking stopped entirely. "Beatrice, is everything all right? It's just a routine audit," I said. My tone clipped. "Strictly internal. And Harrison, this stays entirely between you and me. Do not put this into the official corporate log yet." "Understood," he said simply. "I will have a preliminary trace for you by noon." I ended the call at the exact moment I heard the water in the upstairs shower shut off. I slipped my phone into my pocket and grabbed a stainless steel whisk. When Derek strolled into the kitchen, I was expertly flipping an omelet. I forced my tense shoulders to relax. I adjusted my facial features into the soft, welcoming expression of a loving wife who had nothing more pressing to worry about than breakfast. Derek looked incredibly refreshed. The heavy exhaustion from the night before had completely vanished, replaced entirely by the buoyant, vibrant energy of a man who had just gotten exactly what he wanted. He walked up behind me, wrapping his arms warmly around my waist. "Smells amazing," he murmured into my hair. "Did you sleep well?" "Like a baby." I lied effortlessly. I turned around in his embrace and handed him a warm plate. "I sent that wire authorization through for you. You should have the funds in your account by now." He beamed, and for a split second, I actively searched his face for even a microscopic trace of guilt. There was absolutely none. There was only profound relief and a brief flash of arrogant triumph. "You completely saved my life, B. The investors are going to be blown away. This guarantees the deal." "I'm so glad," I said, watching him take a bite. "I was actually thinking that maybe I should join you at one of these high-stakes dinners. It's been quite a while since I met with the Silicon Valley guys." Derek stopped chewing for a fraction of a second. It was almost imperceptible. He swallowed hard and shook his head, letting out a light, dismissive laugh. "Baby, you would absolutely die of boredom. It's all just technical zoning jargon and cigar smoke. Besides, you already have more than enough on your plate with the new hotel acquisition. Let me handle the heavy lifting for this one. You just sit back and enjoy being the queen of the castle." The queen of the castle. That was his absolute favorite new narrative to spin. He wanted me sitting high up on a throne, so I wouldn't look down and notice that he was actively looting the treasury. "You're probably right," I said, taking a slow sip of water to wash down the bitter bile that was rising rapidly in my throat. "I honestly don't know what I would do without you handling all the sordid little details." He gave me a quick, careless peck on the cheek before walking out, grabbing a green apple on his way to the elevator. "Don't wait up for me tonight. We might go pretty late celebrating the signature." "Have fun," I called out cheerfully. The absolute second the private elevator doors slid shut, the warm smile dropped from my face like a heavy velvet curtain. I walked straight into my home office and locked the heavy mahogany door. I did not go into the corporate headquarters that day. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair, staring blankly at the dual monitors, waiting for the digital breadcrumbs to finally appear. At 11:45 a.m., my secured line rang loudly. "Tell me," I said, not even waiting for a greeting. "It's not a vendor." Harrison's voice was bone dry, entirely devoid of emotion. "The funds moved from the operational account into a holding company called Velvet Sky LLC. From there, they were immediately wired out to a luxury car dealership in Greenwich, Connecticut." I felt a sudden, distinct sensation of freezing cold spreading rapidly through my chest. It wasn't a broken heart. A broken heart is hot, messy, and agonizing. This was the pure, unadulterated chill of absolute clarity. "What kind of dealership, Harrison?" "Velocity Motors," he stated matter-of-factly. "They specialize strictly in imported Italian exotics." The wire transfer was clearly flagged as a priority deposit. $380,000. I repeated the number aloud. "That is not a lease. That is an outright purchase." "So, it appears," Harrison agreed. "Beatrice, do you want me to officially flag this as corporate embezzlement? I can completely freeze the subsidiary's accounts in under 10 minutes. "No," I said instantly. "Not yet. If we freeze the accounts right now, he will immediately claim it was a clerical error. He'll say it was a massive misunderstanding, a personal loan he fully intended to pay back by Friday. He will twist the narrative." "So what are we doing?" "We are going to let him drive it," I said coldly. "Keep monitoring everything. I want a completely unredacted history of every single transaction over $500 on his corporate card for the last 6 entire months." I hung up. I sat there alone in the deafening silence of my multi-million-dollar penthouse. I did not cry. I did not throw my heavy crystal paperweight across the room. Instead, I calmly opened a brand new spreadsheet. I typed assets into one column and liabilities into the other. Under liabilities, I typed the name Derek Foster. I spent the entire afternoon digging a very deep grave. I had given Derek total autonomy because I mistakenly trusted him, but I still maintained root-level administrative access to every single server within the Sterling Capital network. I bypassed the standard user interface and dove straight into the raw system logs. I wanted to see exactly what the CEO of my subsidiary was doing when he wasn't busy buying Ferraris. I found the usual, innocuous daily activity emails to construction contractors, schedule verifications, but then I spotted a blaring red alert in the security protocols from exactly 3 days ago. There had been a localized login using Derek's exact credentials at 2 a.m. He had actively accessed a highly restricted folder, the Sovereign Wealth Investment Fund. My breath caught painfully in my throat. That specific folder did not contain urban construction blueprints or zoning permits. It contained the highly sensitive contracts for my long-term family capital, the liquid assets that fundamentally supported the entire leverage of the company. Derek had absolutely no business being inside that folder. He possessed read-only access, but the server logs clearly showed that he spent 40 long minutes meticulously reviewing the liquidation clauses and the spousal transfer rights. He wasn't just stealing corporate cash to buy a flashy car. He was actively studying the architectural blueprints of my empire to see if he could somehow rip out a foundational cornerstone without the entire roof collapsing on his head. I snapped the laptop shut. The sun was beginning to set over Manhattan, casting long, reddish-orange shadows across the room. Derek honestly thought he was so incredibly smart. He thought he was playing an intricate, sophisticated game of chess while his clueless wife was busy arranging flowers. Unterfranted. But he had made one fatal, unforgivable mistake. He presumed that just because I was quiet, I was also blind. He had just bought a luxury sports car with stolen funds. He was actively researching how to access my private capital. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the bustling streets of New York City. I could have stopped him today. I could have called the federal authorities. But that would have been entirely too easy. It would just be a messy, drawn-out divorce. And he might walk away with a quiet settlement, just to disappear. No, I needed him to go so much further. I needed him to feel so entirely secure, so incredibly untouchable, that he would sign his name on something that wouldn't just end our marriage, but would absolutely obliterate him. I walked back into the kitchen and began methodically chopping vegetables for dinner. When he finally got home tonight, I would warmly ask him about his day. I would listen to his pathetic lies about the investors and the grueling negotiations. I would smile. I would pour his expensive wine. And I would wait. The car was just the appetizer. I was going to wait until he tried to order the main course. The encrypted notification from my secure server pinged at exactly 10:09 a.m. the next morning. It was a single, highly compressed PDF file from Harrison, labeled simply as Asset Trace. I sat inside my home office, the heavy door locked tight and the blinds drawn shut, shielding the room from the gray, overcast New York morning. I didn't open the file immediately. I took a slow sip of water, centered my breathing, and clicked the mouse. The $380,000 had traveled incredibly fast. It moved from Sterling Urban Developments to the holding company Harrison had mentioned. And within 2 hours, it was wired directly to the luxury dealership in Greenwich. But the digital invoice attached to the wire transfer was the definitive, smoking gun. It was an official purchase order for a Ferrari Portofino. The listed color was Rosso Corsa. The registered buyer was not Derek Foster. The buyer was listed as Velvet Sky LLC. I leaned back in my leather chair. My husband hadn't bought a car for himself. Derek drove a sleek, company-issued Mercedes S-Class. A bright red convertible was definitely not his style. It was far too loud, far too impractical for a man desperately trying to project serious executive gravity. That car was a gift. I picked up my phone and dialed Harrison's direct line. "I'm looking at it right now," I said. the second he answered. I pulled the LLC and corporation documents for Velvet Sky, Harrison said, his voice crisp and clinical. It was officially registered exactly 3 weeks ago. The registered agent is a generic legal proxy service, but the mailing address links back to a private P.O. box in Tribeca. Dig deeper, I ordered. But for right now, I need the raw data. Send me the unedited, unredacted credit card statements from the subsidiary's discretionary fund. Go back 6 full months. Already sent, Harrison replied. Beatrice, please. Be careful. I hung up the phone and opened the new file. It was a massive spreadsheet containing thousands of rows of financial data. I began to cross-reference the information. On one monitor, I had Derek's official corporate calendar, the one his executive secretary managed, filled with board meetings, site visits, and investor relations dinners. On the other monitor, I had the raw spending log. It took me less than an hour to completely dismantle the entire reality of my marriage. On May 12th, Derek's calendar stated he was at a grueling zoning hearing that ran late. The credit card statement showed a dinner for 2 at a high-end steakhouse in Tribeca, followed immediately by a massive charge at a 5-star boutique hotel. The dinner bill was $600. City zoning officials do not eat $600 steaks. On June 4th, he claimed to be attending a real estate conference in Boston. The corporate card showed a massive transaction at a luxury mountain spa in Aspen, Colorado. On July 15th, an exorbitant charge for a diamond tennis bracelet appeared cleverly disguised under the category of office supplies. The vendor was a high-end boutique on Fifth Avenue, but the internal expense code had been manually overridden. I tasted a cold, sharp, metallic tang in my mouth. This wasn't a one-time slip-up. This was an entire, parallel lifestyle. He was actively funding a second existence, using the profits of the empire that I had built with my own blood and sweat. I minimized the spreadsheet and pulled up the internal files for the Hudson River expansion project. I needed to be absolutely, undeniably sure. I logged into the municipal database using my developer credentials. I searched for the permit applications. Status: pending review. Last action: 4 months ago. There were no new investors. There was no imminent closing deal. The $380,000 was simply grand theft. Dressed up nicely in a custom suit and silk tie, he had looked me dead in the eyes, kissed my forehead, and robbed me blind just to buy a shiny new toy for someone else. I shut down the computer. I needed fresh air. I needed to see the actual physical manifestation of this betrayal. I knew Derek's habits perfectly. If he bought a flashy, obnoxious car for a woman in the city, she absolutely wouldn't keep it hidden away in a garage. She would be out flaunting it, and on a Tuesday afternoon in Manhattan, there was really only one prime location to show off loud: new money. I grabbed my designer handbag and drove my black sedan toward Midtown. The city was buzzing with chaotic energy. Tourists clogged the sidewalks, staring up at the massive skyscrapers, completely oblivious to the fact that half of these buildings were leveraged to the absolute limit, and the people inside them were drowning in a sea of secrets. I pulled into the luxury underground parking garage near Fifth Avenue. It was the exact kind of place where valets prominently parked Lamborghinis in the very first row, and everyone else spiraled up to the 4th floor. I drove agonizingly slowly, scanning the reserved VIP spots near the private elevators. My heart was beating in a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I tried to tell myself that I was just going shopping, that I was just Beatrice Sterling, highly successful businesswoman, treating herself to a new silk scarf. And then I saw it. It was parked aggressively across 2 spaces right near the entrance, gleaming viciously under the harsh fluorescent lights like a drop of fresh blood. A Ferrari Portofino, Rosso Corsa. I quickly checked the license plate against the image Harrison had securely sent me. It was an exact match. I parked my sedan in a dark spot 3 rows back, killed the engine, and waited in the shadows. The hand-stitched leather of my steering wheel felt freezing cold beneath my tightly clenched hands. I watched the elevator doors intently. 10 minutes ticked by, then 20. At exactly 2:45 p.m., the heavy steel elevator doors finally slid open. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of high heels echoing against the concrete rang through the garage before I even saw her. She walked out with the unearned confidence of someone who truly believes the entire world is a movie set, and she is the undisputed main character. She looked to be about 26 years old. She wore oversized designer sunglasses, skin-tight yoga pants that cost more than a monthly mortgage payment, and a cropped luxury jacket. She was holding her phone up, actively talking into the camera, filming a vlog of herself as she strutted toward the Ferrari. This was Riley Vance. I recognized the exact type immediately. She was the kind of woman who treated her entire life as a content creation opportunity. She was pretty, yes, in a highly curated, heavily filtered sort of way. But what truly struck me was the sheer arrogance radiating from her posture. She didn't walk like she was incredibly lucky to be driving that car. She walked as if it were a fundamental human right owed to her. She stopped next to the Ferrari, struck a provocative pose for her phone, and let out a laugh, a bright, entirely empty sound that grated on my nerves. She was carrying 3 massive shopping bags from high-end stores where Derek had previously claimed to be buying gifts for clients. I could have easily stayed in my car. I could have just taken a few photos through my windshield, driven away, handed the evidence over to my divorce attorney, and ended this entire thing cleanly from a distance. That would have been the completely safe choice. That would have been the Beatrice who actively avoided messy conflicts. But that Beatrice had stayed home today. I pushed my car door open. The sound echoed loudly in the silent, cavernous garage. Riley paused, her hand hovering halfway to the Ferrari's door handle. She looked up, scanning the dark garage. I stepped out from the heavy shadows of the concrete pillar. I was wearing a navy, custom-tailored power suit and trousers, my hair pulled back into a severe, immaculate bun. I didn't look like a trendy influencer. I looked exactly like the person who signs the paychecks for the influencers. I walked directly down the center of the concrete aisle, my heels making a crisp, intensely authoritative sound. I didn't rush. I walked with the steady, terrifying pace of an eviction notice arriving in the mail. Riley lowered her designer sunglasses, narrowing her eyes at me. She didn't recognize me yet. To her, I was just some random, older woman in a suit walking through a parking garage. She turned back toward her car, completely ignoring me, and pressed the unlock button on her key fob. The Ferrari chirped loudly. I stopped exactly 10 feet away from her. "Beautiful car," I said. My voice was perfectly calm, echoing slightly off the cold concrete walls. Riley turned around, a polite but deeply dismissive smile plastered on her face. "Thanks. My boyfriend just got it for me." "I know," I said evenly. "I paid for it." The fake smile instantly faltered. She completely froze, her thumb hovering uselessly over her phone screen. She looked at me, she really, truly looked at me, and I watched the exact moment the realization hit her like a freight train. She saw the incredibly expensive jewelry I was wearing, the commanding way I stood, the undeniable resemblance to the woman she had probably only seen lingering in the background of Derek's life. I didn't move an inch. I just stood there, waiting for her to fully comprehend that the game she thought she was playing had just violently changed ownership. The air in the garage felt incredibly heavy, saturated with the smell of exhaust fumes and cheap, overpowering perfume. I watched Riley Vance process my statement. For a split second, I saw raw, unfiltered panic flash in her eyes, the primal instinct of a thief caught with her hand inside the cash register. But then, a completely different expression took over. It was a look of pure defiance, fueled entirely by the arrogance of a woman who foolishly believes she has already won the war. She didn't back down. Instead, she took a bold step toward me, her heels clicking aggressively on the concrete. She tilted her head, inspecting me with a mock sympathy, perfectly designed to cut deeper than any physical knife. "You must be Bia," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly, artificial sweetness. "I recognized you from the framed photos on his desk. Though, honestly, you look a lot older in person." She waited eagerly for me to flinch. I didn't move a muscle. I kept my face perfectly smooth, my hands relaxed casually at my sides. I suppose I should say hello, Riley continued, completely closing the distance between us until the overwhelming scent of her vanilla body spray became suffocating. Since we are practically family now, Derek talks about you all the time. Well, not all the time. Usually just when he's complaining about how utterly suffocating the house feels. She raised her hand, dangling the Ferrari key fob right in front of my face. The glossy red finish caught the harsh fluorescent light. She shook it slightly, producing a mocking, jingling sound that echoed in the silence of the garage. He told me he bought this because he finally wanted to see someone actually enjoy life for a change, she said, her lips curling into a vicious, cruel smirk. He says you are. What was the exact word? Intense. No, that wasn't it. Boring. He says you are completely boring. He says living with you is exactly like living with an Excel spreadsheet. That was the calculated phrase that was supposed to completely break me. That was the pivotal moment where I was supposed to scream, lunge at her, or dissolve into a pathetic puddle of tears and deep insecurity. It was a highly calculated strike aimed directly at my age, my personality, and my failing marriage. But Riley Vance fundamentally did not understand who the hell she was talking to. She foolishly thought she was talking to a heartbroken, betrayed wife. She didn't realize she was talking to the entity who quite literally held the mortgage to her entire existence. I looked at the dangling key, then I looked back up at her expectant face, desperate for a dramatic reaction. I smiled. It wasn't a bitter, twisted smile. It was a genuine, exceedingly polite smile. The exact kind of smile I gave to junior executives when they made a foolishly naive suggestion in a corporate boardroom. It is a truly beautiful car, I said incredibly softly. The handling on the Portofino is quite exceptional, especially out on the open highway. I am absolutely sure you are going to enjoy it. Riley's smirk faltered, her perfectly manicured brow furrowed in deep confusion. She had thrown a live grenade at my feet, and I had simply complimented the shrapnel. Is that it? She snapped, her voice entirely losing its sugary coating. You're not going to desperately ask me how long this has been going on? You're not going to ask me if he actually loves me? I have absolutely no need to ask questions when I already possess all the answers, I replied calmly. Drive safely, Riley. The insurance premiums on that vehicle are quite astronomical. I turned my back, dismissing her entirely, as if she were nothing more than a valet. I was done. The complete lack of conflict infuriated her. She desperately needed the dramatic confrontation to validate her position. If I refused to fight her, she wasn't the triumphant winner. She was just a cheap mistress standing in a parking garage. Hey, she yelled, her shrill voice echoing sharply off the walls. Don't you turn your back on me. You think you're so vastly superior just because you have the ring? Look at this. She shoved her arm forward, shaking her wrist violently. He gave me this for our 3-month anniversary. And this bag? We bought it in Vegas last week, while you sat at home thinking he was at some boring corporate conference. I stopped walking and looked back over my shoulder. Hanging heavily from her shoulder was a limited edition quilted designer bag. I recognized it instantly. It matched a $3,200 charge on the corporate card exactly, filed fraudulently as office supplies for the marketing department. But then my eyes drifted down to her wrist, and the breath entirely stopped in my throat. She was wearing a platinum timepiece with a mother-of-pearl dial and a highly distinctive blue sapphire bezel. It wasn't just a very expensive watch. It was a custom piece commissioned exclusively for the Sterling Capital Foundation's annual charity gala. There were only 5 of them in existence in the entire world. I had personally signed the acquisition order myself. It was supposed to be sitting inside the secure vault at corporate headquarters, waiting to be auctioned off to raise funds for pediatric health care. Derek hadn't just used corporate funds to buy her flashy presents. He had physically removed a tangible asset from the corporate vault. That wasn't just adultery. That was grand larceny. A strange, total calm washed over me. Up until that exact moment, there was a tiny, foolish part of me that viewed this entire situation as a personal, domestic tragedy. But seeing that watch on her wrist changed absolutely everything. This was no longer a marital dispute. It was an active crime scene. "That is a lovely watch," I said, my voice dropping into a register that was almost entirely mechanical. "Does it suit you?" Riley puffed up her chest, proudly stroking the stolen metal. "I know. Derek says I deserve nothing but the best. He certainly does have expensive taste," I said. I walked back toward my car. I could hear her huffing loudly behind me, deeply frustrated that she hadn't managed to draw any blood. She wanted a screaming match, but I wasn't going to give her one. Not here. Not now. Not when she was merely a symptom of the underlying disease. I reached my black sedan and pulled the door open. As I slid smoothly into the driver's seat, I grabbed my phone. Through the heavily tinted glass of my side window, the angle was absolutely perfect. Riley was still standing next to the Ferrari, glaring down at her phone, probably frantically texting Derek to tell him that his wife was completely insane. I raised my camera. The reflection in my side mirror framed the entire scene flawlessly. Riley, the Ferrari with the dealership plates clearly visible, and the sharp, unmistakable profile of her face. I snapped 3 high-resolution photos in rapid succession. Then I zoomed in tight and took one final picture focused entirely on the stolen charity watch gleaming on her wrist. I lowered the phone and pushed the ignition button. I did not cry. My eyes were bone dry, and my hands were perfectly steady on the leather wheel. As I pulled out of the parking garage, leaving the girl and the red car behind in the gloom, I felt a profound transformation occurring within me. The deep sadness I had felt that morning had completely evaporated. It was replaced entirely by a sensation that was cold, hard, and razor-sharp. It felt exactly like forged steel. Derek had called me boring. He had called me a spreadsheet. He was about to learn the hard way that spreadsheets are the most incredibly dangerous things on Earth, especially if you happen to find yourself on the wrong side of the column. I merged into the avenue traffic, the bright city lights blurring as I sped past. I was completely done being the supportive wife. I was done being the loving partner. Tonight, I was going to be the chairman of the board, and I was about to aggressively call in the loan. The drive home from the garage was a sheer blur of forward motion and tightly repressed fury. I don't remember the traffic lights. I don't remember the music playing on the radio. I only remember the distinct sensation of my skin cooling down, as if all the blood had drained completely from my body to pool somewhere deep within my core. When I stepped inside my penthouse, the silence, which usually felt so peaceful, now felt like a massive vacuum just waiting to be filled with violence. I did not go into the kitchen. I did not pour myself a stiff drink. I walked directly into my home office and locked the door behind me. I sat down at my desk, the surface of the polished mahogany feeling freezing cold beneath my palms. I took a deep, shuddering breath of air into my chest, and then I powered up my workstation. The Beatrice, who had stood in the parking garage and smiled politely at her husband's mistress, was entirely gone. In her place sat the founder and CEO of Sterling Capital. I was no longer looking for mere disillusionment. I was actively conducting a forensic financial audit. I logged straight into the central corporate system using my master administrative key. This supreme level of access allowed me to see absolutely everything, not just the heavily sanitized, superficial reports Derek prepared for the board of directors, but the raw, unfiltered data that flowed directly through the veins of the company. I pulled up the complete financial history of Sterling Urban Developments for the last 24 months and placed it side by side with Derek's personal calendar. It was exactly like watching a movie where you finally spot the ghost hiding in the background of every single scene. I saw the meticulous architecture of a double life built with terrifying precision. On March 3rd, Derek's corporate calendar listed a grueling 3-day site inspection down in Houston, Texas. He had claimed that severe weather delayed his return flight. I pulled up the corporate expense report. There was a flight, yes, but certainly not to Houston. The corporate jet's flight log showed a massive diversion straight to Street Barts. The exorbitant expenses for those 3 days were fraudulently logged as client relations. The itemized breakdown included the rental of a private luxury villa featuring a heated infinity pool and a personal chef. I scrolled down rapidly to August 10th. There was a charge for $4,000, categorized broadly as office supplies. I dug into the scanned image of the receipt stored in the secure cloud. It was definitely not printer paper or toner. It was a receipt from a high-end luxury boutique in Hudson Yards for a designer handbag. The exact same brand I had just seen hanging off Riley's shoulder an hour ago. I felt a sudden, violent wave of nausea, but I swallowed it down forcefully. I forced my eyes to keep moving across the data. Entries for high-end client dinners were scattered throughout the ledger like pieces of shrapnel. I cross-referenced the dates with the restaurant reservation systems. They were almost exclusively tables booked for 2. The bills heavily featured bottles of vintage champagne that cost $600 apiece. These were absolutely not business meetings. They were romantic dates. He was courting her with my money. He was carefully constructing a whirlwind romance using the very bricks of my empire. I opened the telecommunications log next. I requested the raw, unedited data from Derek's corporate-issued cell phone. The screen instantly filled with thousands of numbers. I sorted them by frequency of contact. One specific number stood out aggressively. It appeared thousands of times. It appeared early in the morning on his commute to work. It appeared during his lunch hour. But the ones that made my hands physically shake were the calls placed late at night. The log showed lengthy calls at 9:30 p.m., 10 p.m., and 11:15 p.m. These were the exact times when Derek texted me to say he was trapped in a late meeting or dealing with a massive site crisis. He wasn't in a meeting. He was on the phone with her, probably complaining bitterly about me, probably excitedly planning their next luxury getaway, while I sat in the very next room, genuinely worried about his rising stress levels. I plugged a solid-state external drive into the USB port. I did not trust the cloud servers anymore. I needed something entirely physical, something he could never possibly delete. I initiated the data transfer. I meticulously created folders labeled by date. Inside every single folder, I placed the damning evidence: the calendar entry, the credit card transaction, the jet flight log, and the corresponding phone record. It was a comprehensive dossier of betrayal. It was a federal indictment. I truly thought I had seen the worst of it. I thought the stolen jewelry and luxury trips were the absolute extent of his greed. And then, I found the consulting contract. I was carefully reviewing the subsidiary's approved vendor list, searching for any other financial irregularities, when I noticed a recurring, massive monthly payment of $100,000 being wired to a company called Northbridge Consulting LLC. The name sounded highly professional. It sounded exactly like a legitimate consulting firm we might regularly hire for urban planning or navigating complex regulatory red tape. But the sheer amount triggered my instincts. $100,000 a month. That was the monthly retainer fee for a top-tier corporate law firm, not some generic consulting group. I clicked deeply into the vendor profile. The contract had been officially signed by Derek Foster on behalf of Sterling Capital and an individual named R. Vance on behalf of Northbridge Consulting. My heart entirely stopped. R. Vance. Riley Vance. I quickly copied the listed address for Northbridge Consulting. 400 Park Avenue, Unit 45B. I opened a separate browser window and searched the address. It was absolutely not a corporate office building. It was a hyper-luxury residential skyscraper. Unit 45B was a 2-bedroom apartment. I leaned back heavily, the air rushing out of my lungs in a ragged gasp. Derek hadn't just bought her flashy presents. He had put her directly onto the corporate payroll. I quickly tallied up the payments. The fraudulent contract had been active for 2 entire years. 2 years of $100,000 monthly payments. 2 years of fake project completion bonuses. The grand total came out to a staggering $2,400,000. This wasn't just simple infidelity. This was massive, systemic embezzlement. Derek had maliciously used his position as CEO to create a highly fraudulent contract with a shell company owned by his mistress. He was actively siphoning massive capital out of Sterling Capital and laundering the stolen money through fake consulting work. He was robbing me blind to illegally fund the lavish lifestyle he felt he inherently deserved. The entire gravity of the situation shifted instantly. This was no longer just a matter for family court. It was a federal crime. It was massive tax fraud. It was a severe breach of fiduciary duty that could easily send him to federal prison for a decade. My finger hovered over my phone. My primal instinct was to call him, to scream, to completely unleash the blinding fury that was boiling intensely inside me. I wanted to drive straight back to that parking garage and violently throw the printed papers right in his face. But I paused. If I confronted him right now, he would immediately panic. He would claim it was a massive misunderstanding. He would try to access the corporate servers and permanently delete the emails. He would shred the physical copies of the contracts. He would empty the joint accounts and completely disappear. Or even worse, he would try to pin the blame entirely on me, claiming that I authorized it, claiming that I was the one illegally moving the money. He was a pathological liar. And liars are incredibly dangerous when cornered. I needed to be vastly smarter. I needed to be the grandmaster chess player he never, ever thought I was. I ejected the hard drive and slid it directly into the hidden wall safe located behind the bookshelf. I locked it securely with a biometric thumb scan. I couldn't strike just yet. I had to let him think he was completely safe. I had to let him firmly believe the lie was holding up. I needed to strategically cut off every single one of his escape routes. Before I struck the match, I looked at the clock. It was 5 p.m. Derek would be arriving home in exactly 2 hours, smelling like someone else, flashing his perfectly rehearsed smile. I stood up and walked over to the mirror hanging in the hallway. I looked closely at my reflection. My face was pale, but my eyes were crystal clear. There were absolutely no more tears. I had to play the absolute performance of my life tonight. I had to be the loving, doting wife for one more evening. I had to cook him dinner. I had to ask about his stressful day. I had to let him kiss me, because when I finally dropped the hammer, I wanted to be absolutely certain that he would have nowhere on earth to run. I was going to lock every door, freeze every account, and strip him of every single asset until he was exactly what he was when I first met him. A man with nothing but a cheap suit and a pocket entirely full of lies. The private dining room at the Carlisle Hotel was completely soundproof, windowless, and smelled faintly of expensive lilies and deep, old money. It was the exact kind of room where massive corporate mergers were negotiated and political careers were quietly ended. I sat at the head of the long, polished mahogany table. Sitting directly across from me was Monica Ross. Monica was not just a lawyer, she was a highly advanced weapons system stuffed into a tailored Chanel suit. We had attended law school together 20 years ago. I migrated into commercial real estate development. She went ruthlessly into family law and quickly became the most deeply feared divorce attorney in all of New York City. I slid the encrypted hard drive and the massive, printed dossier across the polished wood. "Read it," I commanded. Monica put on her reading glasses. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't offer a single look of pity. She opened the thick file and began to read, for 20 long minutes. The only sound in the room was the crisp turning of pages and the soft clinking of silverware, as I pushed a salad around that I had absolutely no intention of eating. When she finally closed the heavy folder, she took off her glasses and looked directly at me. Her expression was terrifyingly calm. "This is not a simple divorce case, Beatrice," she stated flatly. "This is a federal criminal indictment just waiting to be filed." "I know," I said. "Can we win?" "Win?" Monica let out a short, dry, humorless laugh. "Beatrice, I personally wrote your prenuptial agreement. I wrote it when you were already worth $50 million and he was driving a beat-up Honda. That document is ironclad. It clearly states that any proven infidelity completely voids his right to a single cent of alimony. But this. She tapped the thick file with a perfectly manicured nail. This severe breach of fiduciary duty, the embezzlement through the shell company. We are not just going to divorce him, we are going to utterly annihilate him. She pulled out a legal pad and uncapped a heavy fountain pen. We need a massive, multi-front attack. If we file the divorce papers first, he will be tipped off. He will try to liquidate assets or destroy evidence on the corporate servers. We absolutely cannot give him a head start. So we hit him everywhere, all at once, I said. Exactly, Monica said, writing furiously. We execute simultaneously. I will draft the divorce petition, aggressively citing adultery and massive financial fraud. But we are not going to serve him just yet. First, we need the corporate termination. I can simply fire him, I said. I am the majority shareholder. No, Monica corrected sharply. You cannot just simply fire him. You need to officially fire him for cause to legally trigger the clawback clauses in his executive contract. That means we need the board of directors involved, but only the ones we absolutely trust. Once he is fired for cause, his entire severance package, that $4 million golden parachute, is completely voided. She looked up. Her eyes narrowed. But there is something else here. Something you might have missed in the sheer volume of data. She flipped back to exactly page 42 of the dossier I had compiled. It was a printout of an email Derek had sent to our external corporate accountants just 3 days ago. Look at the subject line, Monica said. I read it aloud. Asset reallocation for tax optimization. Read the body, she ordered. I scanned the text. Derek was actively asking the accountants to prepare a legal transfer of 18% of his performance-based shares into a private offshore trust. He claimed it was to lower his tax burden for the upcoming fiscal year. I don't understand, I said. He doesn't even own those shares yet. They don't vest for another 2 full years. He knows that, Monica said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He was actively trying to trick the accountants into signing off on a transfer of unvested capital. If they had approved this, and if you had blindly signed the quarterly audit without reading the fine print, he would have legally moved ownership of those shares into a trust that you absolutely cannot touch. He wasn't just stealing cash. Beatrice. He was actively preparing to steal a massive piece of the company's foundation. A violent chill ran violently down my spine that had absolutely nothing to do with the air conditioning. Derek wasn't just greedy, he was actively plotting a corporate coup. He wanted to leave me, but he wanted to take my entire life's work with him. He's trying to make his final exit, I said. He knows the marriage is dead. He's just trying to grab as much as he can before the body goes cold. Exactly, Monica said. Which means we are completely racing against the clock. He is getting impatient. If he pressures the accountants again, they might call you directly to verify. We absolutely cannot risk that conversation happening while he is still inside the house. She ripped the page off the legal pad and handed it to me. It was a precise timeline. Here is the play, Monica said. We move on Friday. You authorize Harrison to prep the total bank freeze. I will have the divorce papers stamped and ready. You trigger the IT lockdown. And then, only then, we drop the bomb. Friday, I repeated. That is in exactly 48 hours. Can you hold it together for 2 more days? Monica asked, looking at me intently. Can you sleep in the exact same bed as him and not hold a pillow over his face? I can do it, I said firmly. I have been negotiating with absolute sharks for 20 years. Derek is just a minnow who falsely believes he's a predator. Excellent, Monica said. She picked up her phone. I will start drafting the motions. You handle the internal logistics. And Beatrice, prep your security team. When a man like Derek realizes the game is over, he doesn't just surrender. He explodes. I left the luxury hotel and got into my car. I did not go home. I went straight to Sterling Capital headquarters. I walked directly into Harrison Price's office. The glass walls were frosted, offering total privacy. Harrison looked up the second I walked in, saw the expression on my face, and immediately put down his phone. "Is it done?" he asked. "Not quite yet," I said. "We are moving on Friday night. I need you to prepare the documents for the bank. I want a total, immediate freeze on all joint accounts and a complete revocation of his corporate credit lines. I want the letters to the investors prepped and ready, explaining that there has been an abrupt change in leadership due to internal restructuring. And Harrison, I want you to draft the official termination letter." Harrison nodded, his face grim. "I will have it all ready. All I need is the signal." "The signal will be a text message," I said. "One single word. When you receive it, execute everything. Do not call me. Just cut the access." "Understood," he said. There was one final stop to make. I took the elevator down to the lobby and found the building's head of security, a massive ex-military man named Marcus. I asked him to walk with me over to a quiet corner of the expansive lobby. "Miss Sterling?" Marcus said, nodding respectfully. "Marcus, we have a highly delicate situation," I said, keeping my voice strictly professional. "On Friday night, there is a very high probability that a resident of the penthouse will become incredibly difficult. I am terminating an employment contract and a marriage simultaneously." Marcus didn't even blink. "Mr. Foster?" "Yes," I said. "What are your instructions?" "I want a full team on standby in the lobby," I said. "If I call down, I want you in the elevator in 30 seconds. And Marcus, if he refuses to leave the premises after I ask him to, I want him physically removed. I do not care if he is wearing a tuxedo or his pajamas. If he resists, you treat him like an intruder." "We will handle it, ma'am," Marcus said. "Do you want us to deactivate his key fob access in advance?" "No," I said. "I want him to be able to get in. I want him to feel perfectly comfortable. I want him to come home thinking absolutely everything is normal. I will let you know exactly when to cut the access." I drove home as the sun set over the iconic skyline that I had helped build. The city looked beautiful, a glowing grid of gold and steel. Derek would be arriving home soon. He would probably be in a fantastic mood. He would think his fraudulent email to the accountants was being processed smoothly. He would think his young mistress was waiting for him with her new stolen watch. He would think I was the exact same clueless wife who blindly signed whatever he put in front of her. He had absolutely no idea that the entire chessboard had been completely rearranged while he was busy looking at himself in the mirror. I walked into the penthouse and kicked off my heels. I went into the kitchen and started pulling ingredients from the fridge. I would cook his absolute favorite dinner. I would pour him a glass of wine. I would listen to him talk endlessly about his day. I would give him 48 more hours of feeling like an absolute king, because when the clock finally struck on Friday night, his entire castle was going to violently crumble, and I would be the one holding the detonator. Friday night arrived wrapped in a thick, suffocating fog that rolled off the Hudson River. But inside our penthouse, the atmosphere was crackling with the frantic, electric energy of a man actively preparing for his coronation. Derek was inside the massive master closet, happily whistling a tune I didn't recognize. It was a light, upbeat melody that sounded utterly grotesque against the looming reality of what was about to happen. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching him through the open doorway. He was applying cologne with an incredibly heavy hand. The scent of sandalwood and bergamot floated out to me, thick and nauseating. It was the exact same cologne he had worn on our very first date, and now he was actively using it to seduce another woman while spending my money. He adjusted the square gold cufflinks that I had bought him for his 35th birthday. He turned toward the full-length mirror, smoothing the silk lapels of his midnight blue tuxedo. He looked handsome. I couldn't deny that he looked the absolute part of the perfect husband, the wildly successful CEO, the man who effortlessly had it all. It was a genuine shame that in just a few short hours, he would be nothing more than a statistic. "You look incredibly sharp," I said. My voice was rock steady. I had actively practiced this exact tone in the shower for 20 minutes. It was warm, encouraging, and completely hollow. Derek spun around, flashing that bright, boyish smile that had once made my knees weak. "You think so?" This meeting tonight is absolutely crucial, B. These investors are strictly old guard. They judge you by the cut of your suit before you even open your mouth. Who are you meeting with again? I asked, feigning total ignorance. The Miami Consortium, he said without a second of hesitation. I told you about them. They are highly interested in a massive partnership for the coastal expansion. If we close this, Sterling goes completely national. It was a total lie. There was no Miami Consortium, there was no coastal expansion, there was only a table for two at the Apex at Hudson Yards and a Mistress eagerly waiting for a celebration. He walked over to the bed and sat down right next to me, taking my hand in his. His palms were slightly clammy. Nerves, or perhaps excitement. Actually, baby, there is one final hurdle, he said, his voice dropping into a hushed, confidential whisper. To get them to officially sign the letter of intent tonight, I need to show them absolute proof of liquidity. They want to see a substantial capital reserve sitting in the operational account, just for 24 hours, to prove we are deadly serious. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had solemnly sworn to love and honor me. He was looking back at me with wide, anxious eyes, literally asking me to hand him the very knife he intended to stab me in the back with. How much do you need? I asked. $1,800,000, he said. He said it so incredibly casually. $1.8 million. To him, it was just a number on a screen. To me, it was the absolute final insult. He desperately needed almost $2 million to impress Riley. Perhaps to put a massive down payment on a luxury property for her, or to hide away in an offshore account he foolishly thought I wouldn't see. I let the heavy silence hang in the air for a moment. I watched him sweat. I saw the tiny, imperceptible tremor in his eyelid as he waited for my answer. He was utterly terrified that I would say no. He needed this cash to keep his fragile house of cards standing for just one more week. I squeezed his hand. I forced a soft, indulgent smile onto my face, a smile that reached my eyes just enough to be totally convincing. Of course, I said softly. If it is for your dream, Derek, do it. I will authorize the massive transfer from the fund immediately. The air rushed out of his lungs in a massive, ragged sigh of relief. He pulled me into a tight embrace, squeezing me hard. Thank you, B. You have absolutely no idea what this means. I am doing all of this for us. When this massive deal closes, I'm taking you on a luxury trip. Just the two of us, I swear. I know you are doing this for us. I whispered against his expensive jacket. He pulled away, kissed me quickly on the lips, and checked his luxury watch. I have to run. I don't want to keep them waiting. Don't wait up. This negotiation could easily go late into the night. Good luck, I said. He grabbed his phone and practically jogged out of the room. I heard his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. Then, the front door opening and closing. The heavy mechanical click of the deadbolt locking sounded exactly like the seal closing on a tomb. I didn't move for an entire minute. I let the silence settle completely. Then I stood up and walked slowly to the window. I watched the sleek company car pull out of the garage and merge into the heavy traffic, heading directly downtown. He was gone. I walked straight into my home office and sat down at the computer. I did not authorize the $1,800,000 wire transfer. Instead, I opened the bank's secure administrative portal. A blaring red notification was pulsing aggressively in the corner of the screen. I clicked it. It was a high-level alert from the fraud prevention algorithm. New line of credit request, pending approval. I opened the specific details. The request had been submitted just 2 hours ago from an IP address that perfectly matched the computer in Derek's corporate office. He was actively requesting a secured line of credit in the massive amount of $500,000, using our joint assets as collateral. But the primary applicant was listed as Beatrice Sterling, with Derek Foster listed solely as the authorized proxy. I stared blankly at the screen. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. He wasn't just planning on stealing the $1,800,000 I had just promised him. He was actively trying to open a clandestine credit line entirely in my name. He was rapidly building a massive escape fund that I would be held legally responsible for. He knew that once a divorce was initiated, his personal assets would be instantly frozen. So, he was trying to secure a massive pile of cash that legally belonged to me to fund his legal defense or his ultimate escape. He wanted a golden safety net. I picked up the phone and directly dialed the bank's elite client services line. I didn't have to wait on hold. "This is Beatrice Sterling," I said, the moment the representative answered. Verification code Alpha Niner Zulu. "Good evening, Miss Sterling. How can I assist you tonight?" "I am currently looking at a credit request submitted earlier today in my name," I said, my voice crisp and totally devoid of emotion. "I absolutely did not authorize this request." "Oh." The representative paused. "I see. It was submitted with your digital proxy signature by Mr. Foster." "Mr. Foster does not have my authorization to open any new lines of credit," I interrupted sharply. "I want you to mark this specific request as highly fraudulent. Do not just cancel it. Flag it. I want an official, time-stamped record that this attempt was made entirely without my consent, and I want the official rejection notice to be delayed until tomorrow morning." "Understood, Miss Sterling. I am officially flagging it as unauthorized activity right now. Will there be anything else?" "No, that is all." I hung up. By flagging it as fraud, I had just handed my divorce attorney yet another devastating weapon. When we finally got to federal court, this wouldn't just look like a misunderstanding. It would look like criminal identity theft. I picked up my cell phone, opened my highly encrypted messaging app, and found Monica's contact. I typed 2 words. "Tonight, proceed." The reply came back instantly. "Ready when you are. Petitions are queued." I quickly switched to my chat with Harrison. He was waiting. He had the kill switch for the bank accounts, the credit cards, and the corporate access primed and ready to be thrown. He just needed the final signal. I typed the word "now." My thumb hovered right over the send button. I hesitated not because I had any lingering doubts. I hesitated because I wanted to truly savor the exact moment. I closed my eyes and vividly pictured exactly where Derek was right now. He would be arriving at the high-end restaurant. The valet would be opening his door. He would confidently walk into the dining room, the exact place where he had proposed to me 10 years ago. The hostess would guide him to the absolute best table by the window, overlooking the glittering city. Riley would be sitting there, wearing a dress that I paid for, drinking expensive champagne that I paid for. He would be smiling brightly. He would tell her that the massive money was coming. He would tell her that his wife was a gullible fool, that the transfer was fully approved, that they were rich beyond measure. He would order the most expensive vintage wine on the menu. He would feel like the absolute king of New York. I wanted him to take that very first sip of wine. I wanted him to feel the absolute, dizzying height of the peak before I violently shoved him off the cliff. I checked the time. 7:30 p.m. He would be seated by now. He would be ordering dinner. I stared at the blinking cursor sitting right next to the word "now." I took a deep breath. The air inside the penthouse was cool and perfectly clean. The nauseating smell of his cologne was finally fading. I pressed send. At 7:45 p.m., my husband confidently walked through the heavy gilded doors of the Apex at Hudson Yards. It was a restaurant that smelled exclusively of clarified butter, truffle oil, and old money. 10 years ago, at table 4, right next to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the Manhattan skyline, Derek had gotten down on one knee and promised to fiercely protect me forever. Tonight, he was sitting at that exact same table, but the woman sitting across from him was not his wife. Riley was wearing a stunning emerald green dress that I knew cost $2,000 because I had seen the charge on the corporate Amex just last Tuesday. She was absolutely glowing, practically vibrating with the anticipation of the massive windfall Derek had just promised her. They were holding hands affectionately across the white tablecloth, laughing loudly at a joke that was probably at my expense. Derek signaled confidently for the sommelier, ordering a bottle of vintage Bordeaux that easily cost more than most people's monthly rent. He looked exactly like a man who had entirely conquered the world. He had absolutely no idea that he was already dead. I was sitting quietly in my home office. The only light in the room emanated from the 3 large monitors arranged in a semicircle before me. My cell phone rested silently on the mahogany desk, the screen glowing with a single, active conversation. The recipient was Harrison Price. The message box contained one single word. I didn't hesitate. I didn't feel a single pang of regret. I looked at the digital clock on my screen. It was 7:46 p.m. I pressed send. Now, the status of the message instantly changed from sent to delivered in less than a second. The response was immediate, not in typed words, but in the sudden, violent cascade of raw data crashing across my monitors. I had just given Harrison the supreme authority to execute a synchronized financial demolition, and he was moving with the blinding speed of a high-frequency trading algorithm. Phase 1 was the banks. On the left monitor, I watched the secure portal of our primary joint checking account. This was the massive reservoir, the account where Derek's CEO's salary was deposited, where our massive dividends dropped, and from where he drew his entire arrogant confidence. The balance sat at a very healthy $640,000. In real time, the numbers wildly fluctuated. An override transfer command initiated by Harrison violently swept the entire balance, leaving exactly $0. The funds were instantly routed into a brand new, segregated trust account solely in my name, heavily protected by a legal firewall that Monica had constructed earlier that day. Next came the massive credit lines. I watched intently as the status of the American Express Centurion card, the heavy, black titanium card that Derek loved slapping down on dinner tables, changed instantly from active to closed, stolen, compromised. The corporate Visa Infinite followed suit immediately. The primary line of credit tied to our penthouse was frozen solid. Derek was currently sitting in a luxury restaurant, about to order a souffle, with a designer wallet full of plastic that was now nothing more than useless scrap metal. Phase 2 was corporate identity. On the center monitor, I had a remote, God's eye view of the Sterling Capital server status. The IT department, acting under my direct, written orders as the majority shareholder, initiated a forced logout protocol for the user ID. Foster, CEO. If Derek were looking at his smartphone at that exact moment, he would have seen his corporate email app suddenly go completely blank, followed instantly by a prompt aggressively demanding a password. If he tried to enter his password, he would discover it no longer worked. His access to the cloud drive, the corporate contact lists, the sensitive project blueprints, and the massive investor data had been entirely severed. The digital drawbridge had been pulled up, and he was left freezing on the outside of the moat. Simultaneously, the corporate HR system automatically generated a document that Harrison had personally drafted. It was a formal notice of termination for cause. The listed cause was not vague. It explicitly cited specific clauses in his employment contract regarding severe gross misconduct, massive misappropriation of corporate funds, and extreme breach of fiduciary duty. This wasn't a corporate downsizing. It was a firing that violently stripped him of his massive severance, his stock options, and his entire dignity. The email was scheduled to land in his inbox, which he could no longer access, and a legal courier was already en route to the restaurant to physically hand-deliver a copy. Phase 3 was the legal kill shot. My phone vibrated heavily on the desk. It was a message from Monica. Filed. Case number 2, 055CV09112. Asset restraining order is active. Monica had just electronically filed the petition for dissolution of marriage in the New York State Supreme Court. Unlike a standard divorce, this filing included 80 pages of damning evidence. It included the receipts for the Ferrari, the flight logs to Street, Bart's, the invoices for the jewelry, and the highly illegal contract with Northbridge Consulting LLC. By filing it right now, before he even knew what was happening, we had legally locked the status quo. If he tried to move a single red cent or sell a single asset from this moment forward, he would be held in severe contempt of federal court. But I wasn't finished yet. There was one final door I needed to slam shut, a door Derek didn't even know I had the key to. I turned to the right monitor. This was my highly private email client. I had a draft waiting, addressed directly to the board of directors of Sterling Capital. These were the 7 powerful men and women who ultimately controlled the destiny of the company. They liked Derek. He charmed them. He played golf with them in the Hamptons. I knew that when the news of the messy divorce broke, some of them might try to side with him, foolishly thinking this was just a domestic dispute that might hurt the stock price. I had to ensure they completely understood that Derek wasn't a victim. He was a massive liability. I opened the draft. The subject line read, "Urgent, internal audit discoveries, and immediate risk mitigation." In the body of the email, I didn't talk about his affair. I didn't talk about my broken heart. The board did not care about feelings. They cared solely about civil liability. I laid out the cold, hard facts of the Northbridge Consulting LLC contract. I clearly explained that the CEO of the subsidiary had been actively siphoning corporate funds into a shell company owned by a personal associate. I attached the corporate registry documents of the shell company, clearly showing Riley's name, and the payment logs signed by Derek. I framed the situation perfectly. Derek had aggressively exposed the entire company to federal tax fraud allegations and massive potential lawsuits. I wrote, "To protect the sheer integrity of Sterling Capital and our valued shareholders, I have exercised my supreme authority to terminate Mr. Foster with immediate effect. We must convene an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. to discuss damage control and the aggressive recovery of the embezzled funds." I read the text one last time. It was cold. It was professional. It was absolutely lethal. I hit send. The email went directly to the chairman, the audit committee, and the corporate legal counsel. Within minutes, phones would start ringing in massive mansions across Greenwich and beachfront estates in the Hamptons. By the time Derek finished his appetizers, he would be a total pariah. Nobody on that board would touch him with a 10-foot pole. He wouldn't be able to call in favors. He wouldn't be able to twist the narrative. I had labeled him entirely radioactive before he even realized the reactor was leaking. I leaned back in my chair. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. The cooling fan of my computer hummed softly, cooling the processors that had just dismantled an entire man's life. It was done. The trap had been sprung. I stood up and walked into the kitchen. I poured myself a tall glass of water. My hands were perfectly, incredibly steady. I looked at the clock. 7:55 p.m. At the restaurant, the sommelier would be approaching their table with the vintage bottle of wine. He would present the label. Derek would nod approvingly, expertly playing the role of the wealthy connoisseur. The sommelier would uncork the bottle and pour a small taste. But the moment was rapidly approaching. The massive bill would come at the end of the meal, but the horrifying reality check was going to arrive much sooner. I vividly pictured the scene. The sudden vibration of his phone as confused, panicked texts from his friends began to pour in. The error message on the corporate login, the highly embarrassing decline of the credit card. I took a sip of water. It tasted incredibly clean and cold. I was no longer the sad wife waiting at home. I was the architect of his absolute ruin, and I had just aggressively pulled the keystone out of the arch. Now, all I had to do was wait for gravity to do its job. I didn't need to be sitting at table 4 of the Apex to know exactly what was going down. I intimately knew the rhythm of the restaurant, the low lighting, and the way sound traveled through the velvet-lined booths. I knew my husband, and I knew the specific brand of extreme arrogance he wore when he thought he was spending someone else's money. At 8:15 p.m., the dinner was winding down. Derek had ordered the full tasting menu, paired with a 1,982 Bordeaux that cost $3,500 a bottle. He was playing the role of the mogul perfectly. He was expansive and deeply drunk on his own reflection in the window. Riley was also playing her part. She had spent the last hour actively photographing the food, the wine label, and her own wrist adorned with the stolen charity watch. She was relentlessly posting stories to her social media, adding captions full of diamond emojis and phrases like, "treated like an absolute queen." She was proudly broadcasting her victory to the entire world, totally unaware that she was actually documenting ironclad evidence for my lawyers. Then came the absolute moment of truth. The waiter, a man named Henry who had served us for years and likely recognized Derek with a strange new woman, placed the heavy leather billfold on the table. The total would have been well over $5,000. Derek didn't even bother looking at the total. He laughed at something Riley said, reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket, and pulled out the heavy titanium American Express Centurion card. He dropped it onto the tray with a casual, arrogant flick of his wrist. "Add 20% for yourself," Derek said, his voice echoing just a little too loudly. Henry nodded professionally and took the billfold away. This is the exact part where time usually stretches. The conversation at the table naturally continues. Derek probably took a sip of water, smiling warmly at Riley, promising her that the massive funds for the new apartment would be wired by morning. Riley probably smiled back, touching his hand, greedily calculating the square footage of the penthouse she firmly thought she was getting. Then, Henry returned. He didn't walk with the brisk, efficient speed of a processed payment. He walked slowly. He held the leather folder with both hands, pressing it against his chest like a man bearing terrible news. He leaned in close, keeping his voice incredibly low to avoid embarrassing the other wealthy patrons, though the sudden silence at their table was already attracting stares. "I am incredibly sorry, Mr. Foster," Henry whispered. The card was completely declined. Derek frowned, the confident smile not entirely leaving his face, but freezing in place. "That's completely impossible. It is a Centurion card. It has no preset limit. Run it again. The chip is probably just dirty." "I ran it 3 times, sir," Henry said softly. "The return code is highly specific. It states the account has been closed for security reasons." "Closed?" Derek's voice jumped an entire octave. "That is absolutely ridiculous." "Here." He yanked out his designer wallet. He produced the Visa Infinite, the massive corporate card. "Use this one, and bring me another espresso." Henry took the card and quickly retreated. Riley was staring intently at Derek now, her perfectly sculpted brow deeply furrowed. "Is everything okay, baby?" "Everything is fine. Just a stupid bank glitch," Derek said, waving his hand dismissively. "B probably messed up some paperwork at the office. You know how totally incompetent admin can be." He was still blaming me. He was still insulting me. Henry returned much faster this time. He didn't lean in. He simply placed the plastic card back on the white tablecloth. "Declined, sir." The air around the table seemed to be violently sucked into a vacuum. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the clinking of silver, the low murmur of wealthy conversations seemed to amplify the dead silence at table 4. "Try the debit card," Derek said, his hands visibly starting to shake as he fumbled with the expensive leather of his wallet. He pulled out another card, then another. He slapped them down onto the white tablecloth, one by one. "Declined. Declined. Declined." Sweat began to bead rapidly on Derek's forehead. It wasn't the warm flush of expensive alcohol anymore. It was the cold, greasy sweat of absolute, sheer terror. People at the neighboring tables were beginning to turn around. The whispers quickly started. "Isn't that Derek Foster? I thought he was loaded. He's completely maxed out." Riley's posture changed instantly. The fake adoration completely vanished, replaced by the sharp, calculating glare of a predator, realizing her prey has absolutely no meat on its bones. "Derek," she hissed, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "What the hell is going on? You said you wired the money." "I did. I will," Derek stammered. He snatched up his phone. "I just need to check the banking app. It has to be a system-wide glitch. A hacker attack. It has to be hackers." He ripped open the bank app. He waited agonizingly for the facial recognition to log him in. The screen finally loaded. There were no millions. There was no overdraft protection. There was simply a stark gray screen with cold numbers. Total available balance, $0. Status, frozen. Contact administrator. He stared wildly at the phone. He swiped down frantically to refresh. 0. He swiped again. 0. It was as if his entire existence had been permanently deleted. "I don't understand," he whispered, his voice cracking horribly. "It's gone. It's all gone." Riley was staring at him. Her eyes were not filled with gentle concern. They were filled with absolute, unfiltered disgust. She looked at the pathetic man sweating through his expensive tuxedo. The man who suddenly looked incredibly small and exceedingly cheap. "Are you kidding me?" she hissed viciously. "You brought me here, ordered $5,000 worth of food, and you can't even pay for it. You told me you were the CEO. You told me you owned the entire company." "I do," Derek pleaded. Desperately trying to grab her hand, she recoiled violently, as if he were highly contagious. "Riley, baby, listen. It is just a massive mistake. I will fix it. I just need to call Bea." "You need to call your wife?" Riley let out a harsh, incredibly ugly laugh. "That is your grand solution? Begging mommy for allowance money?" Before Derek could even formulate a response, Riley's phone vibrated violently on the table. It was a loud, irritating buzzing against the crystal water glass. She glared at the screen. It was an unknown number. She answered it irritably. "What?" I can only imagine the voice on the other end, but I know exactly what they said, because Harrison had personally sent me the repo order 10 minutes ago. "Miss Vance," the voice would have said, "this is Velocity Motors. We received an urgent notice from the leasing analyst regarding the Ferrari Portofino. The funds used for the deposit have been officially flagged as stolen corporate assets. The vehicle has been remotely disabled, and a tow team is actively securing it in the garage right now." Riley's face went bone white. The phone slipped slightly in her manicured hand. "What do you mean, stolen?" she shrieked, no longer caring about the massive scene she was causing. "He bought that car. That is my car." "It is evidence, ma'am," the voice said. "Please remove your personal items immediately." Riley slowly lowered the phone. She glared at Derek. The look she gave him was not one of heartbreak. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. "You stole the money?" she said, her voice violently shaking with rage. "The car is being towed right now. They said it was stolen corporate money." "No, no, Riley, I swear." "You lying piece of trash," she screamed. She stood up abruptly, knocking her heavy chair backward. It crashed loudly onto the hardwood floor. The entire restaurant fell dead silent. Every single pair of eyes was glued to them. "You told me you were the man." Riley spat, grabbing her designer bag. "You are nothing. You are a massive fraud. You dragged me into a federal crime." "Riley, wait!" Derek stood up, desperately reaching out to grab her arm. She spun sharply on her heels and slapped him hard across the face. It was a loud, cracking sound that echoed up into the high ceilings. "Do not touch me," she hissed venomously. "And do not ever call me again. I am not going to federal prison because you are a broke loser." She stormed fiercely out of the restaurant, her high heels clicking rapidly, leaving him standing alone in the smoldering wreckage of his massive ego. Derek stood there entirely alone. The waiter was waiting. The floor manager was briskly walking toward him with an expression that was absolutely not friendly. The other wealthy patrons openly stared. Some were even holding up their phones to actively record the spectacular fall of the great CEO. "Sir," the manager said, his voice freezing cold, "we need to settle this bill immediately, or we will be forced to call the NYPD. I don't know exactly what he gave them in exchange to let him leave. Maybe his luxury watch. Maybe his gold cufflinks. Maybe he left his driver's license as collateral. All I know is that 10 minutes later, he was sprinting frantically toward the valet stand. His face was beet red. His breathing came in short, panicked gasps. He got into his corporate-issued car, which he completely failed to realize was the absolute last thing he possessed, and only for a few more hours, and peeled violently out of the parking garage. He was driving entirely too fast. He was hyperventilating. His mind was racing wildly, desperately trying to find a villain for this nightmare. It had to be hackers. It had to be a bank error. It had to be a massive conspiracy. He was driving straight home to me. He was driving to the one person he truly believed could fix everything. He believed, with every single fiber of his delusional being, that I was sitting at home waiting for him, perhaps deeply worried about the technical glitch, ready to write a massive check and make all of his problems disappear. He had absolutely no idea that the glitch was currently sitting in the home office with a hot cup of tea, just waiting to take his keys. He thought he was racing back to safety. He was, in fact, rushing directly into the execution chamber. The private elevator doors to the penthouse slid open with a soft chime. But the man who stumbled out did not look like the master of the house. He looked like a frantic fugitive. Derek burst into the grand foyer. His tuxedo jacket was unbuttoned, his silk tie was hanging loose, and his face was slick with sweat. He was panting heavily. The sheer panic radiated off him in physical waves. I was waiting for him in the main living room. I sat casually on the beige linen sofa, my legs elegantly crossed, a cup of herbal tea resting delicately on a saucer in my hand. The massive room was dim, illuminated only by the ambient glow of the New York skyline outside and a single floor lamp that cast a harsh spotlight on the glass coffee table right in front of me. "B!" Derek screamed my name before he even rounded the hallway. "B, pick up your damn phone. Do you have any idea what just happened?" He saw me. He stopped dead in his tracks, his chest violently heaving up and down. He stared at me. Sitting there in my silk robe, completely calm and totally composed. And for one split second, utter confusion washed over his panic. He expected to find me frantic, deeply worried about bank failures. Instead, he found a stone statue. "The accounts are totally frozen," he gasped, walking toward me, his hands physically shaking. "All of them. The credit cards, the checking account, even the corporate lines. I was at the dinner with the investors, and the Centurion card was declined. It was humiliating. You need to call the bank right now. Tell them it's a massive error. Tell them to unlock it." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. I placed the delicate cup back onto the saucer with a sharp, audible click. "It is not an error, Derek," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It was calm, steady, and terrifyingly final. He completely froze. "What?" "The bank did exactly what I instructed them to do," I said evenly. "I closed the accounts." You what?" He stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Why would you do that? That is our money. You can't just block me from our money." "That is exactly where you are confused," I said, leaning slightly forward. "That card is not ours. That money is not ours. It is mine. You were simply an authorized user. And tonight, I officially decided to revoke your authorization." The remaining color instantly drained from his face. He looked exactly like he had been violently punched in the stomach. He opened his mouth to speak, to desperately argue, but the sheer reality of my words silenced him entirely. For the very first time in our entire marriage, he finally realized that the ground he walked on was not his own. It was land I had merely let him borrow. "B, stop playing games," he stammered, desperately trying to regain some solid footing. "I know you are upset about something. Is it because I've been working late? Is it because I missed dinner? We can talk about this, but you have to release the money right now. I have highly important people waiting. I have massive business deals. You have absolutely nothing." I interrupted smoothly. I reached down to the floor next to the sofa and picked up a thick manila envelope. I tossed it onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a heavy, sickening thud. "Open it," I commanded. Derek stared at the envelope, then back up at me. He took a hesitant step forward, like a man approaching an active bomb. He reached out with trembling fingers and tore open the flap. He pulled out the very first photograph. It was the high-resolution shot of him and Riley, standing closely next to the red Ferrari Portofino. His hand shook violently. He dropped the photo. He pulled out the next sheet. It was the digital invoice for the Ferrari, clearly listing the down payment made with stolen corporate funds. Then came the credit card statements, highlighting the diamond jewelry, the luxury trips to Street, Bart's. The exorbitant dinners. Then the telecommunications logs, pages and pages of them, meticulously documenting every single minute he spent talking to her while I was asleep. He completely stopped breathing. He flipped frantically to the very bottom of the pile and saw the Northbridge Consulting LLC contract. He saw the ironclad proof of massive embezzlement. And finally, he saw the official bank rejection notice for the fraudulent $500,000 credit line he had tried to open in my name just hours ago. The papers slipped from his numb fingers and scattered wildly across the floor. Derek stared at me. The extreme arrogance was gone. The fake anger was gone. All that remained was the naked, pathetic fear of a man who had been thoroughly flayed right down to the bone. He fell to his knees. It was a theatrical, deeply desperate movement. He crawled toward the sofa, trying desperately to grab my hands, but I smoothly pulled them away. "B, please," he gasped, actual tears welling up in his eyes. "Please, just let me explain. It didn't mean anything. She didn't mean anything. It was just, I was stupid. I was weak. But I love you. You know I love you. We can fix this. I'll sell the car. I'll fire her. Just please don't do this to us." I looked down at him. I looked at the man I had spent 10 long years building, the man I clothed, fed, and promoted. I actively searched his eyes for any trace of genuine love, but all I saw was the sheer panic of a parasite rapidly losing its host. "You do not love me, Derek," I said softly. "You love the lavish lifestyle. You love the CEO title. You love the feeling of being entirely bankrolled. You loved me when I was incredibly useful to you. But I am no longer useful. I am simply the person who knows exactly who you truly are." I reached for the second envelope sitting on the table. This one was legal size. I slid it across the marble surface until it stopped right in front of his knees. "This is an official copy of the divorce petition," I said coldly. "It was filed electronically tonight. It explicitly cites adultery and massive financial fraud. The locks to this penthouse will be changed in exactly 1 hour." Derek stared at the legal papers, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. "And right underneath that," I continued smoothly, "is your official letter of termination from Sterling Urban Developments. You are fired, Derek. Fired for cause, which means absolutely no severance, no stock options, no golden parachute." "You can't do that," he whispered hoarsely. "The board, they like me. The board of directors has already received a comprehensive audit report regarding the Northbridge Shell Company," I said. "There is an emergency board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. You are not invited. You are the agenda." Derek slowly stood up. The sheer shock was rapidly mutating into a cornered, animalistic aggression. His face twisted into an ugly snarl. "I am not leaving," he screamed. "This is my home. You cannot just kick me out into the street in the middle of the night. I have legal rights. I am not going anywhere until I speak to my lawyer." I didn't argue with him. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply picked up my cell phone and pressed one single button. "Security," I said into the mouthpiece. "I have a guest who is aggressively refusing to leave the premises. We are standing right outside the door, miss. Sterling." Marcus's deep voice replied through the speaker. I hung up. Before Derek could scream again, the heavy front door swung open. Marcus and another guard, a massive man built like an NFL linebacker, stepped inside. They were dressed in dark suits. They did not look like they wanted to negotiate. "Mr. Foster," Marcus said, his voice perfectly calm but dripping with implied threat. "It is time to go." Derek looked wildly at the massive guards, then back at me. He looked around the multi-million-dollar penthouse, at the expensive art on the walls, at the sweeping view of the city he foolishly thought he owned. He finally realized that he was vastly outnumbered and completely out of power. He violently yanked his tuxedo jacket straight, desperately trying to salvage one final shred of his shattered dignity. "Fine," he spat viciously. "I'll go. But you are going to hear from my lawyers. You are going to deeply regret this, B. You are going to be completely alone and miserable sitting inside this giant glass box. I might be alone for a little while, I said smoothly, but I will be incredibly rich, and I will be completely free. He turned to storm out. Wait, I commanded. He stopped. I pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the marble console table right next to the door. The keys, I said. To the company car, put them on the table. I need to drive somewhere. He protested weakly. How am I supposed to leave? Walk, I said. Or call an Uber. But that Mercedes belongs entirely to Sterling Capital, and you are no longer an employee. Derek glared at me with pure, unadulterated venom. He reached into his pocket and slowly pulled out the key fob to the S-Class. He held it tightly for a moment, his knuckles turning stark white. And then he let it go. The sound of the heavy metal hitting the marble table was incredibly sharp and loud. It sounded exactly like the final period at the end of a very long, very bad sentence. Marcus stepped aside. Derek walked out the door. He did not look back. The heavy door clicked shut behind him. The deadbolt locked automatically. I sat there completely alone in the silence. The security guards nodded respectfully to me and retreated into the hallway, leaving me entirely alone inside my impenetrable fortress. I stared at the empty space where my husband had been standing just moments ago. I waited patiently for the tears to come. I waited for the crushing, suffocating weight of profound sadness. But it never came. Instead, I felt a deep, expansive lightness filling up my chest. I picked up my teacup. It was still perfectly warm. I took a long sip, and for the very first time in years, I tasted the soothing herbal tea, not the bitter taste of anxiety. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. I looked down at the bustling street, 50 stories below. I watched a tiny, insignificant figure walking out of the luxury building, entirely alone in the freezing New York night. He had absolutely no car. He had no money. He had no title. He was simply just a man. And I was, finally, simply just me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would absolutely love to know where you are tuning in from. So please, leave a comment down below, and let's chat about it. If you enjoyed seeing true justice served today, leave a comment and hit that like button to help this incredible story reach even more people.